Hello Flosstube, I'm Jacob of Modern Folk Embroidery, and today we're going to look at a chat I had a couple of days ago with the lovely Yamir, also known as AlmondMnMs. I will link to both her Instagram and her Flosstube channel here in the description below. But for now, let's have a look at what we talked about. Hello Yamir, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing well, thanks. And you?
Very well, thank you. So nice to meet you. So,
Nice to meet you too.
for those watching, I think quite a few people will know you already from your Flosstube and from your Instagram. Um, you are an amazing needlewoman, but I thought, why don't you introduce yourself to the viewers who might not know who you are and what you do?
Thank you. Thank you for such kind words. I'm very humble. Super excited to be able to speak to you and meet you finally in virtual person.
Yes.
So yeah, my name is Yamir, and here on Flosstube and both on Instagram, my alias is AlmondMnMs. Primarily, it's because it's my favorite candy, so why not? I don't eat it all the time, so that's a upfront disclaimer. But yeah, I've been stitching for a long time. I took a break and then came back on, like many of us, during the beginning of last year, 2020, and with the whole pandemic and everything that was going on in the world. So I decided to dust off my needles and all of those little goodies and kind of like find whatever was available at that time, especially with some of the business being temporarily closed and the lack of mail. And, we all know, we all experienced some kind of situation at that time, but I definitely went through some boxes and found some things. And then I just started up stitching. I looked up some patterns, some things that I found were interesting, which one of them were yours, and I just jumped right in. No tutorials or anything. I just jumped right in, and here I am.
Yeah, it is really amazing because, I mean, there's fine stitching and then there's what you do, which is quite extraordinary. Um, I always thought oh, I'm really cool stitching on 40 count linen. But you work on 56 count you've been working on, I believe, and you've been stitching over one on 56 count, right?
Yes. So the funny part was I never knew that there was like an over two or two over two or three, like anything like that. I just thought needle thread, boom, next hole. So for me, I like small things in general, tiny homes.
Yeah.
I write tiny. My minor in college was jewelry design. So it's very like you're up here doing a lot of fine work, like stone setting, a lot of microscopic things.
Yes.
So I'm very used to that. And when I first purchased my first piece of fabric, I really didn't know like Ada. With a fashion background, I do know the difference of, cotton and linen and things like that, but I really didn't know that there was a Ada situation, that there was a really like linen situation. So I just picked up whatever I was able to find at first. And then, when you go through the rabbit hole of like Flosstube and Instagram and Google, you're just like shop, shop, buy, 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 buy. And then all of a sudden everything started coming in together at the same time. And then I just held the fabrics in my hand. I'm like, oh, I like this one. I like that one. But my fundamentals did come from fashion design, did come from me learning with my grandmother just on the big plastic canvases with the big plastic needles that hopefully whenever I have kids, I'll teach them how to cross stitch as well.
Exactly, yeah.
But I really didn't understand the difference of my sizing until I started sharing it. I just thought, okay, cool, I'll just continue, I'll just do what I do. And I honestly don't have any issues seeing it.
Yeah.
So I just kept on going smaller and smaller and smaller. And then my frustration right now is that the smallest I can find is 56 count. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I need smaller. I need something smaller. And that's pretty much where I'm at now. I'm working on a 56 count piece, 1/1. And a lot of my sweet spot. Sorry for the background. I'm
Oh, it's
in
fine.
New York, so you're gonna hear the honking and the everything. So my sweet spot was very like 32, 40 and above. I'd love
Yeah.
56 count. Um, and then, as I said, once I started understanding the difference and seeing a project that you may have stitched, and then I'm looking, you're like, oh yeah, this is my whip. And I'm like, why is theirs so big and mine is so small?
Yeah.
I was just like, well, you know what? I'm going to stitch everything and have more room on my walls to have it all there.
Yeah.
The only struggle that I may foresee sometimes is those patterns that are, I can do it as that has 1/1, but also has 2/1. That would be like kind of like the little tricky aspect, but
Yeah.
we can always modify.
We're doing this video because you came up with something really exciting. Do you want to tell what your idea was?
Yeah. So far in my whip list, which is not large compared to other people's, but I love them. A lot of them are large pieces, but still fairly small for me. I like intricate things, and as many for many of us, cross stitching is an outlet, a stress reliever. And when you look at something, whether it's cross stitching, drawing, or knitting, whatever the case may be, you'll remember what you went through while you were stitching that. And for myself, I personally wanted something big. And it first stemmed from just scrolling on Facebook, Instagram, or something like that. I saw an older gentleman. He stitched this it had to have been king size periodic table. And I think he was stitching it for, I don't know, don't quote me, maybe 10, 20 years. So I saw this and I'm like, well, I want to do that, but not the periodic table.
Yeah, no.
Because that was my least favorite thing to memorize in college. I was just like,
Yeah.
But I was just like, I want something intricate, like something that I can do forever. And especially this year in February, I'm going to turn 30. So I'm just like, I want to do something that it's like, okay, like it took me 10 years or 20 years, I don't know. But I started this on a on a specific date that it wasn't random, like, 27, 25 and a half, like a very, okay, this is my 10-year anniversary gift to myself. Here, I finished it. And like I said, a lot of my pieces per se, they can be big, but I want something bigger. And I want it to be where I can just walk by it and it's like, wow, I know that there's this one floss tuber that mentioned, his name was Darcy Cameron. He said, oh, I have chocolate under that stitch. And I want to remember like each of those sections, like, oh, I have a chocolate, or, oh, I by mistake snipped a little hole in there, but I cross stitched over it. I want it to be a big statement piece, but also something that I can hand off. And it was also inspired by Ellen as well, with her family's coverlet, where it's this gigantic piece. It's not cross stitch, but it's something like that. And I want to have it for a long time. And who knows, maybe in the future, who knows, whoever finishes first or whatever the case may be, we can have one that we can keep in our historical archives. Right now, you have a lot of historical pieces that, many people may not understand the magnitude of it, but something like this, it'll take 10, 20, 30 years, but think about it 100 years from now, where it's like, wow, like it took them 30 years and this piece is here and it's gigantic and it's, I don't know, like at whatever is the best museum in the world, and it's traveling the world, and it just something that you can weave or stitch all of that in there. Like it shows growth over time. We're not perfect. There's a lot of things going on in the world, a lot of healing, growth, passion in there. So it's just, I don't think a small sampler or a small pattern will help me capture that. It has to be big. It has to be a forever piece. And if I don't finish it, hopefully 30, 40 years from now, I can leave it with a little tab in the back. Please pass this down to such and such, and maybe they can finish it for me as well.
Mm-hmm. I saw your Flosstube when you were talking about that you would love to do that, and I thought, like, you know what, I have to get in touch with her and we have to talk about this, because I've had the same idea, because I was in a museum here in Rotterdam and they had an exhibition there on tapestries. It was so fascinating, especially I really liked the 1930s tapestries that they did. They were at the same time modern, but one designer sort of used all these sort of weird medieval elements, and it was flat and strange, and they were enormous. And I was looking at them and thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. This would be so cool to have something, to design something like that. And then I thought, like, wouldn't it be just really cool if this was a cross-stitch idea thing? And it would be big. It would be not just saying like, oh, it's big as in like a 300 by 400 crosses type piece, or big as such a heaven and earth design type. No, this would be big, as in really, really big. And so I started thinking, what could we do? And then I thought, like, no one will buy this, because, I have to also think, like, would someone want to buy this? And then I thought, like, you know what, actually, that would be okay if it was only like stitched by 2 people on the whole planet, maybe. I'm happy with that. But I thought, like, let's just try it, because my thinking was as well, I could do the design in such a way that it is a whole bunch of small stories on a really big piece. Because when you look at old tapestries as well, they have all these little elements, and I thought it would be really cool to play around with those things. But I wanted to hear from you as well. What kind of things would you like to see on the design? Of course, I can't with certainty say, like, yes, that will be what I will design, but I'm really interested to sort of hear a few things from you as well, to see what you would like to stitch and what you would like to think of with this really big piece.
Yeah, definitely. And just to piggyback a little bit backwards, this piece to me, I think about it in the future, or even, like, sadly, my grandmother's no longer with us, so I can't, run to her and say, here, like, do the first 50 stitches, and at least her hands were touching that cloth to begin with. But when you have families that have generations of stitchers, I know within the community, there's a few people that have their kids, their grandkids, and their mom that's also stitching. That's 3 to 4 generations right there, and no, like, you may not be able to finish it, but it holds some kind of significance where you have four different hands that touched it. It's, let's say your mom is 50 years old and the daughter's 25, and then the other grandchild is 10. That's 50 plus 25, 75. That's 85 years of life, of experience, that's touching that, that's historical. And for me personally, like, I just stitch anything. I love your pieces. But I'm very, like, in the romantic, like the samplers, as far as like the letterings and the patterns and Quakers and all of those historical things. But when we look at these different pieces, like, each one does hold one person's story. So why not, as you said, have different pages of the story? And it's like, this is your book, this is your chapter. And it's like, no, you can't judge a book by its cover, because there's no cover and you have all the pages there. So you can just read the story there. You don't have to download the book. You can just look at it and there's no judgments right there because it's painted there for you. And a picture says 1,000 words.
Yeah.
But for me personally, it's all about the details and just like those little like hidden quirks.
Yeah.
I never know how to like hit that word. You know, for example, Jules from Long Dog Samplers,
Hmm.
she, like it's funny because when you look at her pieces and even yours as well, you don't know what you're stitching until you're done and you step back and you're like, oh wow, like this is a little scene in there. And it's like something like that, where it's like
Yeah.
you really have to sit there and scan through and appreciate everything because each piece has a story. And you know, growing up, you'll hear like the stories or like the folk art stories from your grandmother that her mother told her, and it's like you don't even need to like remember it by memory. You have it there and you can read the story
Hmm.
while you're stitching it or while you're looking at it,
Yeah.
and the picture's there for you.
And I don't know how you feel about text, because I always like pieces with text. Like when you look at the old tapestries, they had these beautiful flying banners with bits of text on it. And I was thinking of doing little things like that as well. Probably not huge flying banners because it needs to be adaptable. But what I thought would be really beautiful is if stitches could add their own little blocks of text within
Right.
that sampler. So if you wanted to tell like a little story, I would provide a couple of alphabets that you can pick from, and then you could sort
Right.
of just stitch that onto your sampler, because I think it would be really beautiful. But yeah, that's the forever piece. So I
Yeah.
will start work on this. We will keep talking to each
Yeah,
other more
definitely.
about this, because I think it will be really interesting. But I also wanted to ask you if you wanted to show a couple of the things that you have been stitching.
For sure. Before we jump into that, I did want to chime in a little bit in what you said about just personalizing, and this is just a hypothetical, like me, it just came up in my head. But, like let's say there's a little section that's a little garden. It doesn't have to be a scripture or a text. It could, because this piece is going to be forever, like within your
Hmm.
family. Like you can even have grandma's secret salad recipe, and it could be like one
Yes.
C of this blah blah. So you're actually even passing down even those like recipes by doing it through a
Hmm.
tapestry, like through a cross stitch gigantic piece. So it's all about however you fill that in. I just had a discussion in one of my forums through school, and we were talking about those that are no longer with us. And one of my peers was talking about that she moved back to New York to support her daughter, to help her because she's a nurse. She's a frontline worker. And she's
Hmm.
like, yeah, I came to like give her mom's cinnamon tea. And I responded and I was like, yeah, I know. I wish I would have had my grandmother's tea recipe,
Yeah,
and no one will ever make it. So why not inscribe it in there? Like you
I
have it
love
there
that.
forever.
I
Um,
really like that. Yes. No, that's beautiful. I think, yes, absolutely. I think those things are really beautiful to share them. The little things that make something personal, because
yeah.
that is what I think most people find so attractive about samplers as well. That they do tell the little stories uh, that are not written about in the history books. I'm excited about this.
I'm super excited. I'm super excited.
It'll be fantastic.
Um, yeah, so let me pull some pieces. I did pull some of the pieces that I'm
Yeah.
currently working on. The main one that I'm actively working on is the Zimmerman coverlet, which is one of your pieces. I'm aiming to finish it within the next 2 months, I'm hoping.
Wow.
I think I'm gonna finish it. I last shared it where I was 3 pages in, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. Now I'm another page and a half.
Wow.
But all of my pieces are 1/1. This one is a 40 count 1/1, and I'm using some silks and a mixture of some
Wow.
gold. So I don't know if you can see it that well.
It honestly, it is. I'm just speechless.
And the thing with this one was I'm very organized in a way, so I like to be very like boop, boop, boop. But I just got too excited and I was just like, I need to see the repeat of this. So
Yes.
I continued it over.
Honestly.
So I'm pretty sure I'm gonna finish. This is almost like halfway of the third page, I want to say. So I'm gonna finish off the page and then just work my way down. But you know, I'm using my diploma mailer as a background. But yeah, I am loving this stitch to the fullest. It's just,
it is so amazing, and I love your colors that you've picked. What really, really baffles me is how, I mean, you stitch in hand. You mentioned that in a previous video, so you don't use a hoop, which I do not like to use either. I do sometimes stitch with a hoop if I really have to. And for some pieces, when you have like back stitch, I will use a hoop. Like I've got I think I'll change the colors because I'm not keen on the colors, but I've got this sampler that I was working on, and I've got it on a frame, but I don't like it. I really don't like having this sitting there, and because I find this really awkward, this whole thing, and putting it on a stand where you have it doesn't work for me either. I just like to sit like this, having it in one hand, so flatten the thing. It works much better.
yeah.
What I have found is that when it's extremely, extremely fine, or over 1 on 40 count, for instance, how do you start and how do you finish your threads? Do you have like a big thread on the back that you weave back in, or?
So yeah, so I've tried stitching with hoops, and I do have a little baby hoop that I have for emergencies. It's very tiny. And that's usually if I have to frog and I really need to like stretch it out and really count through and make sure that I'm doing everything properly so I don't have to frog again. So that's usually when I plug it in. But as you did mention, it's very awkward for me to kind of like do the like in and out situation, because usually it's just this hand that's touching everything and I just can't stitch both. It's just super weird for me. But also, especially with this sampler, I noticed that as and you mentioned this morning in your, or you mentioned in one of your previous floss tubes that you like to press it with your thumb, and I do the same thing. And it's very interesting that, especially when you have a lighter piece, over time, like say if you're pulling it off of the spool or off of the skein, it's a very bright red, but then by the time you're done, it's a darker red. I'm not saying it's dirty, but it's just kind of like your body oils and things like that, and it's really like it meshes it in. So I just really like that. And sometimes I'm like, oh, this is too red, so let me just pat it a little bit more and continue doing it. So I really like it that way. Personally, because it's 1/1, I can't do the sewing method. I wish I could. So usually what I do is just the stick and poke. So for myself, this is how I'm always holding it, like this. So it's basically my 2 fingers are my little hoop.
That's what I do.
And that's how I go about it. It takes me a little bit more time versus the sewing method, but I really enjoy the stitches.
So you pinch it as well, don't you? With 2 fingers, 2 fingers. That's what I do. So you have it taut between your fingers, and there's enough tension that way. And I don't find it's not straining on my hand because you sort of constantly move it a little bit anyway. And then when I'm done with the cross, it's that little flick of laying. Because I learned about laying tools a couple of years ago, and I kept hearing people, oh yeah, I've got a laying tool, and all these amazing tools. And I was like, okay, I have a scissor and some needles. And I wasn't even using hoops because it was like, I don't need them. I started buying hoops purely because I like to frame my little round things in them. But I would be stitching them without a hoop, and then I'd be finished, and then I would put the hoop around it. It's
Yeah, and honestly, I just feel like it's all whatever works for you. I don't even remember how I learned, but I do know that I had the plastic gigantic thing. So obviously we didn't use the hoops for that, but it
Mhm.
all just depends on what helps. How do you like it?
Yeah,
And sometimes, if you're tired at the end of the day, you just want to hang out and just do one hand at a time, so be it.
yeah,
You know, it all depends, but my preferred way is the stick and poke, how they say,
yeah,
and that way I can also be a little bit closer versus having to lean a little bit in.
yeah,
Coming from the jewelry industry, that's all what we did. We were always pushing in to be closer to the bench, and
yeah,
that also doesn't help with the posture. And for me, because it's so tiny, I'm gonna be like right here, right here,
yeah.
and I'm fine. I'm
Exactly.
fine, and I just
As,
go on to the next thing.
as long as you can do it, I would say keep stitching fine. But
Yeah, I totally agree. And, the one thing that I will say is stitching, like just even something as simple as, because currently right now I'm working between the coverlet and a Bristol sampler. So the coverlet is 40,
yeah,
or it's 40 or 46, but I'm pretty sure it's 40. I always get it mixed up. So, there is a big difference
mhm,
when you're stitching two different things at the same time. And sometimes I'm like, because of the big difference in holes. And, you know, for example, over this weekend, I stitched both the one that I just showed, and then
yeah,
this one, which is 56 count, 1/1.
which is
And
beautiful.
thanks. And, just by transitioning from those two, I noticed the difference right away. And I'm like, oh wait, I need to ease right into it, not just
Yeah.
jump. But once you adjust, you're fine.
Mhm.
Um, and for this one, I'm slowly taking my time because I love alphabets. And it's just, I don't know, it's just, they're so juicy, and I love
They
just
are
alphabets.
beautiful.
Thank you.
And which one is this, by the way?
This one was in the Gift of Cross Stitching magazine. It's a
Okay.
Bristol Sampler. I always forget the name of the designer, but it starts with the W. It's like WH. I can definitely send you the links so you can
Yes, we'll put it
share
in
it
the link.
below.
If
Yeah,
it's still available, we'll put it in the link
yeah,
down here because it
and
is
it's
stunning.
it's an awesome piece.
Mhm.
Right now, I am working with it with Shiloh from X Stitch MD and
Yes.
Tiffany from Tiffin Stitches, and I just crack up every single time Shiloh like does this, because this page is the size of her one page, and
Yep.
this is my little like tiny page. And
Yeah.
hopefully one day in the future, once we can all meet up and we finish this project, I would love to take a picture together, because it's so funny, because it's like
Yeah.
you know
It it is really cool because the original ones were ridiculously small.
right.
Because the girls that, of course, they didn't have a lot, so they would stitch them on the bed linens and stuff, which were quite fine. But they stitched over too, and that was about 60 count. So you're kind of putting the orphans to shame as well.
Oh, it's
No, I'm.
funny, but
Oh,
it's so I don't know, like I just find some joy, and I love tiny things. And I
yes,
mean,
yes.
I'm always on the go as a New Yorker. Like I'm barely home, I barely sleep, so I always have a little pouch with something in my bag. And if I'm stuck on the train, or I just have it and I can pull it out, versus
Mhm, mhm.
having to lug around a frame or a hoop. And that's also the benefits of stitching in hand. You can really like compact it really tight,
Mhm,
and you're
mhm.
fine, you know. But yeah, this one right now is the smallest one that I have as far as stitch count. And that's another thing for myself. It's a little tough for me to find fabrics that
Yeah.
are higher counts, whether it's the 56 or above. So this year I do plan on stashing up a lot for myself, because I do plan on transitioning from the 32 counts and the 28. I don't have a lot of 28, but just the 30s and the 32s, and really jumping into the 46, 40s
Yeah.
and 56, and just 56 is my sweet spot. I need space on my wall to have as many pieces as possible.
One of my first projects that I started when I started stitching again was on a scrap. I think it was a piece of muslin or something like that I had lying around, which was really fine. And I used some horrible synthetic sewing machine threads.
Right.
But I didn't know anything. I had super sharp needles, and it worked. But I could stitch with it, and I made something with it, and that's the whole thing. You just need to make something with stuff, and so I would give that a try.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this past year, with a lot of the things that were going on, I think we all learned a little bit on rationing and working with what you have, whether it's stitch from stash, or, stitching on something that you typically wouldn't. And I think everyone's stitching has changed in some way, whether you had to wait or you didn't have to wait, or, everyone's stitching changed in some way within the past year, even in the past few months from the summer forward. But yeah, like, I think I try not to be very like, oh, I am not gonna stitch on Ada. Like, I'll stitch on anything, but it has to be tiny.
Exactly.
It has to be tiny, and that's pretty much it. And if I don't have it, then I don't have it, and I'll just have a gigantic 14 count piece on my wall, and I'll enjoy it, because it's just about the process and not what you have.
Exactly. I think we've been chatting. I said to you, it's like, it'll be just about 10-15 minutes, but it's been so fascinating chatting with you. But I wanted to ask you, what have you got, like some last wise words for stitchers who want to try and start stitching smaller?
My main thing would be, and perfect example, I recently, about a few months ago, finished A Secret Sky from yours.
Which is beautiful, yes.
And this is on 32 count, and don't mind my little taping on the ends. But this is a 32 count. And I just did it 1/1, and that's pretty much it. And I feel like once you do like your over 1 situation, you can keep on like scaling yourself. I'm not saying jump from 14 count all the way to 56. I think that's a big shock to the system. As if it's a perfect example. If you're on a cleanse, you're not gonna break your cleanse with a gigantic, I don't know, like hamburger or something like super greasy. You're gonna ease your way into it, and why not? Like, it doesn't mean that you have to pick the gigantic count and then go straight down. You can step right in, gradually continue doing it. And I think that's the best way. And don't think that, oh my God, I have to finish this right now. No, like, there's always tomorrow. We all have whips. We all have projects that we want to continue working on. And for myself as a tiny stitcher, definitely from 56 to 32 count, like, it's a gigantic shock to my system a lot of the times. Even last night, I picked up an old whip, which this one is 32, 20 count, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it might be a 30 count. This one is a 30 count. And it's 1/1. And I was just like, oh my God, it's so big, because I was coming from the 40 count. So you just have to ease your way in. And the main thing is, there's no dumb question. There's no stupid question. And we're all here to answer questions. We're all here to make connections. And if you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here for everyone. We're here to support, because we really love this craft. And what better way than continue passing it on? Whether if you don't know how to do a pin stitch or whatever the case may be, we can make you a little video, whether it's like, a little home video from the phone. We'll teach you how to do it. Or, even like those Facebook groups, there's so many people on everywhere that you wouldn't know. you don't know, you may not have stitchy friends, but if you're like, oh, I'm in New York City and cross streets between XYZ, lo and behold, you're gonna find someone that's 3 blocks away from you or is willing to meet you 30 minutes away. So it's definitely use your support system, use your resources, and don't beat yourself up. I frog. That's the one thing I mean. I hate frogging, but I frog. And the perfect thing is the imperfect thing. And that's something that we all have to really think about. And always, that's the one thing I always say, take it with you. Nothing is perfect, but that is perfect. Because within those flaws, that's where the beauty is. And, you know, it might be tiny, and I know it's very intimidating for some. And if you ask me, I'm going to advocate for you to stitch on smaller counts. But if that's not what you're comfortable with, then don't do it. But I would say start off with 1/1 and then jump on to the next thing. And that's pretty much it.
The perfect thing is the imperfect thing. I like that. That's beautiful. Yamir, thank you so much. You've been inspiring to talk to.
Thank you.
And yes, I'm going to pose a couple of questions to the audience now as well, what they think of the forever piece as well. But thank you so much. You're fantastic.
Thank you for having me. And I hope everyone enjoys this.
So I hope you enjoyed that little chat that I had with Yamir. Now, there's a couple of things. The first thing I want to ask you is, as I touched in the video, what if you would want to stitch on something that's really, really big and that you would be stitching for many years on, what would you like to see on this forever piece? So I want to try and see what the community can come up with, what thoughts you have. It doesn't mean that it will find its way on the forever piece, but I would love just to hear a whole wide range of thoughts and ideas of the things that you would like to see. As I see it, and as I touched on in the video as well, there will be panels on there that can be completely personalized with texts. So I'm thinking more imagery. So what kind of imagery would you like to see? Are there certain animals that you think I should definitely put on there? Is there an idea from a story or from mythology or from something that you think like, oh, that's really cool and that would really speak to me? Do let me know in the comments. I really look forward to reading all of those. What really inspired me chatting to Yamir was thinking about challenging myself, and I think that's a really important thing when you are a crafter. There is nothing wrong with just enjoying what you do, obviously, but sometimes it can be really nice to challenge yourself and thinking, how can I develop further as a crafter? That doesn't per se mean that we should go smaller and smaller and smaller. That's not the goal. For me, I want to see what stitches can I learn, what can I develop further. But the smallness did inspire me a lot, and I actually have been stitching a little bit. So I had a request from one of my customers to release a pattern again that I had released a couple of years ago. I think it was a little tiny sampler, a little pattern that was available for a little period of time as a limited edition thing, and I stitched it back then, and this is what it was when I stitched it a couple of years ago. And I have now stitched it again as a little scissor fob, and this was on 32 count with my own hand-dyed wool, and this is on 56 count, and this is stitched with Coats cotton on 101 by Zweigart. So it's the 56 count 101 cotton. I really like this. I really enjoyed actually working on this, and what surprised me was that how I actually found this quite relaxing to do. I thought that it would have been much more intense and much more sort of of course it's focused, but I had expected it to be much harder than it actually was. It took me a couple of days from start to finish, and I thought I wanted to share that because it was inspired by our lovely chat that we had. And I think it's a nice little scissor fob, this one. The other piece that I have actually taken off my stand, because as I touched in the video as well, I don't like stands. I have found out that they are too bulky for me. I don't like the whole awkwardness of pulling threads through and then having to go back. And I do know that there is a place for them when you do something that's really complex and requires full tension, but also requires that the fabric is not scrunched either in a hoop or in any other way and just needs to be taut and neat. Then you do need a frame, and I think I will use it if I would do something, for instance, with silver threads and embellishments and things. But for now, I have taken off my Bristol Sampler because I was not enjoying it, and every time I walked past my frame I was sort of dreading to sit down and stitch on it. So I have promised myself that I would try and do a couple of letters at least on this one, and it's all scrunched up, as you can see. So I had finished the first bit of the alphabets. That's here, and I'm on the row number 2. Last night I took it off the frame, so I've not really done anything. I've just done, I think, 10 crosses on the letter O here, just purely to see how I was feeling like getting on. So this is the Bristol Monkey Sampler, and this is also stitched with the coats. So coats number, I think it's thread, yeah, it's 50. Coats number 50 is a really beautiful fine thread. You can see it's like really strong. It's very fine. It is kind of like a cotton sewing machine or quilting style thread, but it doesn't do like some quilting threads that can be really stiff and quite difficult to work with and quite unpleasant to work with. Of course not when you're quilting, but when you're doing cross stitch it's not really pleasant to get those tiny stitches to lay nicely. This I am absolutely amazed by. This is color number 7715. It's a beautiful deep red. I really like it. It's different from the DMC 3777, which is my favorite. But this is a really gorgeous deep red color. And I think it's perfect with the 101 linen. It has a really nice contrast, as you can see here on this one here. The linen I have here is, I don't even know if it is linen. It was a gift from a friend in India, and they gave it to me because they know that I do cross stitch. And it was very kind, but at the time I had no inclination of stitching on this until I figured out I could actually do a Bristol sampler on this. So that's this one, so keep an eye on that. I will leave you today with a little bit of a teaser of an upcoming video I'm working on. It will be a video on Quaker samplers, Quaker history, and craftivism, because as some of you will know probably, the Quakers were a force to be reckoned with when during the abolitionist movement. They were among the very first people to say that slavery was not all right, and they are just so inspiring, and I really like that, and I'm gonna give you a quick peek. I will share it hopefully finished next time, and that's an exciting pattern I'm working on. This is not yet available. The little heart I showed earlier is in my shop now. All of the patterns that we have discussed, including the ones Yamir was showing in our little chat, I have linked below to them, including her Bristol sampler, which is from a magazine. It's not in print right now, I believe, but you can probably find secondhand copies online. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or comments, thoughts on the forever piece or other, put them in the comments below. If you enjoy my videos, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell button so you get actual notifications when there is a new video available. And with that, I just want to say thank you for watching. See you next time. Look after yourselves, stay safe, and happy stitching. Bye bye.